When the first dawn broke over the Pacific in December 1941, Japanese pilots looked to the horizon with a strange mix of awe and apprehension. The sky, once an infinite expanse of possibility, had become a battlefield where every shadow could be death, and every glint of sunlight on metal could mean the approach of an enemy plane. They had been trained to embrace honor and sacrifice, to meet danger with a code inherited from generations of warriors. Yet even the most disciplined among them could not quell the quiet fear that throbbed like a pulse in the chest before takeoff. The Americans were not faceless enemies, nor were they mythical monsters of propaganda. They were real, breathing, thinking men who shared the same sky, the same risks, the same fragile thread between life and annihilation. From the first clash over the coral reefs to the long dogfights across open sea, the Japanese pilots began to recognize patterns, to feel the rhythm of the American strategy, and to sense that behind every calculated maneuver there was not only skill, but a terrifying will to endure. In the earliest confrontations, the Japanese pilots spoke in code and whispered in hidden corners of airfields about the Americans' uncanny persistence. Planes would falter, engines would smoke, wings would shear in the turbulence of battle, yet these pilots returned again, often scarred but unbroken, with the same determination that had sent them into the fray before. It was not the raw numbers of aircraft that impressed, nor the strength of metal, but the human element, the focus, the adaptability, the refusal to surrender even when the odds were stacked impossibly against them. In moments between sorties, letters smuggled through tight channels, diaries hidden in the folds of their uniforms, spoke of a strange mixture of dread and respect, a cognitive dissonance that turned enemy pilots into figures of fascination and quiet horror. The skies were a mirror, and Japanese pilots saw in the Americans their own fears, their own tenacity, the very same thirst for survival that had been drilled into them since training began. The fight over the Solomons, over Guadalcanal and New Guinea, became a theater not just of metal and fire, but of psychology. Pilots learned that the Americans approached combat not merely as soldiers, but as hunters, constantly adapting, improvising, and absorbing lessons from every engagement. Japanese aviators, trained to rely on intuition, discipline, and rigid formation tactics, found themselves confronted with an enemy who could break patterns, exploit weaknesses, and then vanish into clouds, leaving them questioning their own strategy, their own instincts. There were moments of fleeting admiration when an American fighter, seemingly outnumbered and wounded, danced across the sky, turning what should have been a fatal encounter into a narrow survival. And in those moments, Japanese pilots felt the uneasy thrill of respect for an adversary who fought with a clarity that mirrored their own. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world lay in fragile stillness, young pilots wrote in journals they hoped no one would read. They wrote of terror and exhilaration, of the sensation of staring death in the eye while gripping controls, of the grotesque beauty of aerial combat, and of the Americans who seemed to understand the same delicate calculus of risk and endurance. These were not propagandized monsters, but men, brothers, sons, friends, who shared the same hunger for survival, the same capacity for courage and fear. In letters home, sometimes intercepted or partially censored, there were confessions of admiration, rare but vivid, for the Americans who executed impossible maneuvers or who, with calm precision, inflicted damage while preserving their own lives. For a culture steeped in ritualized notions of honor, these admissions were almost taboo, a whisper of doubt beneath the roar of official doctrine. Every engagement, from the first dive to the final dogfight, was a lesson in mortality. The Japanese pilots came to recognize the Americans not only as opponents, but as vectors of a new kind of warfare, one that combined industrial might, tactical ingenuity, and relentless psychological pressure. The Americans were tireless, methodical, and unyielding. They returned again and again, sometimes battered, sometimes bleeding, always watching, always calculating. and for every Japanese pilot who fell in the sky, there was a growing awareness among those who survived that they were facing a form of courage as alien as it was compelling. It was a courage born of necessity, of training, of a relentless drive to achieve objectives in the face of unimaginable danger. Behind the scenes, intelligence efforts and intercepted communications added layers to this perception. Japanese analysts listened as American pilots coordinated with fluidity, demonstrating an initiative that seemed absent from the rigid hierarchies Japanese pilots had been taught to trust. Tactical decisions, spoken over crackling radios, revealed a network of individual skill and collective discipline that unsettled even the most confident commanders. As the war progressed, the very existence of continuous waves of American planes reinforced the sense of being confronted not merely by skill, but by the inexhaustible capacity of a nation to marshal resources, train men, and endure losses without faltering. The Americans became more than pilots. They became the embodiment of an unrelenting, almost spectral force, as present in the mind as in the sky.
Kamikaze missions, often misunderstood by outsiders, revealed the complexity of Japanese perceptions. These pilots, trained to sacrifice themselves, were acutely aware of the Americans they faced. Their diaries and letters, though few survived, spoke not of hatred alone, but of fascination and fear, an understanding that the enemy pilots they would confront were human, capable, and relentless. In these pages, a hidden dimension of the war emerges. The American pilot was both the target and a mirror of their own mortality, a measure of the challenge that awaited them in the final moments of life. The intensity of this dual awareness created a psychological strain that few outside the cockpit could comprehend. Even after the war, the reflections of surviving Japanese pilots revealed the depth of their complex perceptions. In quiet reunions, in interviews, in memoirs, they spoke of American flyers with a nuanced understanding. They remembered the skill, the focus, the courage, and the adaptability of those who had been once their adversaries. They recalled the moments when life hung by a thread, when they witnessed feats that seemed impossible, when the line between respect and fear blurred. In the silence that followed the roar of engines, they acknowledged a shared humanity with the men who had sought to destroy them, a realization that the enemy in the sky was caught in the same machinery of survival, duty, and fear. The hidden operations and intelligence battles further shaped these perceptions. Intercepted messages, decrypted communications, and the study of American tactics revealed an enemy who was far more than the sum of its machines. They were problem solvers, improvisers, and strategists. They adapted rapidly, learned from their mistakes, and returned to confront Japanese pilots who had thought themselves superior in skill and preparation. Each successful engagement, each narrowly avoided catastrophe reinforced the Japanese understanding that American airmen were not merely instruments of national power, but human beings with ingenuity, resilience, and an unyielding will. As the war drew toward its devastating conclusion, the psychological weight of confronting American airmen intensified. The introduction of long-range bombers, relentless aerial bombardments, and the relentless expansion of American air power transformed the perception of enemy pilots from opponents in tactical duels to symbols of unstoppable force. Every sortie became a confrontation with an invisible tide of industrial and human energy that seemed impossible to withstand. Yet, within this fear, Japanese pilots also recognized the limits, the vulnerabilities, the moments of hesitation and error that revealed the Americans' humanity. It was a tense, delicate balance between awe and terror, between respect and the primal drive to survive. Letters and memoirs that survived the final collapse of Japan revealed the haunting texture of this perception. American pilots were remembered not merely as destroyers of cities or ships, but as opponents whose professionalism, courage, and ingenuity left indelible marks on those who faced them. They were the men who demanded every ounce of skill, every measure of focus, and every shred of courage from those who took to the skies against them. And in the quiet aftermath, those who survived carried this understanding like a weight, a testament to the paradox of admiration and fear coexisting within the heart of a young warrior trained to kill, yet forced to respect what he could not conquer. The skies themselves became a repository of memory. Islands, reefs, and open waters were etched in the consciousness of Japanese pilots not just as tactical landscapes, but as stages for the interplay of fear, respect, and human connection across the Gulf of War. Each encounter, each maneuver, each explosion of gunfire left traces that shaped their understanding of the Americans who flew above them. The war in these dimensions was not only a struggle of machines and nations, but a psychological ballet where survival, courage, skill, and empathy intersected in fleeting, often brutal moments of shared humanity. In the decades that followed, as Japan rebuilt and the pilots aged, their reflections became more nuanced, more contemplative. The Americans they had faced were remembered with complexity, as relentless opponents, as symbols of overwhelming national power, as embodiments of courage and skill, and as human beings navigating the same terror, duty, and desire to survive. In personal reunions, interviews, and memoirs, the language shifted from propaganda and anger to subtle acknowledgement of what those who had faced each other in the skies had truly been. Two sets of men, bound by circumstance, courage, and the merciless calculus of survival, each shaping the perception of the other in ways that outlasted the roar of engines and the flash of machine guns. This hidden dimension, the psychological terrain, the layers of respect, fear, and understanding is the essence of what Japanese pilots really thought of American airmen during World War II. It is not a story of simple hatred or blind admiration, but a rich, often dark tapestry of human experience, forged in the crucible of battle. Each dogfight, each mission, each encounter left imprints on minds and hearts, creating a legacy of perception that endured long after the war's official end. It was a recognition that beneath the camouflage, the steel, and the doctrine, there existed a shared humanity, a fragile thread connecting those who fought with a dedication and ferocity that transcended nationality. In the end, the American pilot in the eyes of the Japanese was both enemy and mirror, threat and teacher, destroyer and inspiration. He was a presence in the sky that demanded recognition, respect, and a confrontation with the very limits of courage and mortality. And for those who survived, the memory of these men, their skill, their determination, their humanity, remained as enduring as the skies they once shared in conflict, a haunting and profound testament to the hidden dimensions of a war that reshaped the world and the human soul.